It's our great pleasure to welcome Michael Hunter, Chief Growth Officer of Meatless Farm, as a speaker to this, our 2020 Online Trends Summit. Meatless Farm is one of the fastest growing brands in the meat alternative sector. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Let's talk about the journey so far for Meatless Farm, the perfect storm, or what appears to be, of consumer influences, and the future for meat alternatives, particularly through the lens of sustainability. So welcome, great to have you here today.
Thank you, Charles. Delighted to be here.
Great. I mean, perhaps we could just kick off with, as a startup brand, or what was not that long ago, what was the kind of founding inspiration behind Meatless Farm?
Yeah, so the Meatless Farm was founded by Morton Toft Beck. He started the company inspired basically by a young family who wanted to eat plant-based foods, but really struggled with the challenges of young children pushing the plate away from the table, not enjoying what they were eating. So he began to research the issues around meat reduction, what was available, what kind of products. And he wanted to create a plant-based alternative that really delivered on flavor, texture, and appearance of meat products, but at the same time, really focusing in on reducing the reliance of intensive agriculture and really importantly, food that the whole family was going to sit around the table and enjoy together. And that really set the course and the mission for the company in reducing the world's overall meat consumption and action on climate change.
And I guess those principles continue to flow through your business and organization today, which will...
Oh, very much so, yes.
So can you bring to life to us what the journey has been so far? It's been rapid. I mean, like many of the people watching today, we've kind of observed that from the outside, and it's of course great to work with you as a client as well, but it's been pretty rapid, hasn't it?
Yeah, so the company was founded in 2016, 2 years of research by Morton and exploring the kind of product and format. Really started trading in 2018, and that was securing the first listing with Sainsbury's, opened a small office in Leeds, manufacturing site in Nottingham. Today, huge global growth, 100 people across 4 hubs, Leeds, Amsterdam, New York, Singapore. 2019, we got a national distribution with an agreement with Whole Foods in the US, and that really set the path for expansion in the natural channel, grocery channel in North America. Today, we have distribution partners in the UK with Asda, Tesco, Morrisons, through to pub chains like Green King and Mitchell and Butchers. We also have food service with Breaks, high-end restaurant suppliers like Woods Food Service, but also great partnerships with high street QSRs like Itsu, who use our product in a number of different in builds. Growth, 111% in the latest 52 weeks. We're now on sale in 22 countries around the world. Most recently, we launched a partnership with Walmart, where we're bringing the Meatless Farm to consumers in Chile and Latin America. So it's been super exciting, but we know that the rapid growth is important, but the challenge ahead of us is still huge in terms of getting people to reduce the amount of meat that they eat, as the environment really depends on this change of behavior.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you just mentioned there. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments' time, if that's okay. One thing I've been kind of dying to ask you is, as what you're doing, challenges conventions and norms that have been in and around our industry for probably hundreds of years. So, do you see yourself? Are you a food company or a tech company, or are you a protein company? I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
It's a great question. I think it becomes somewhat of a blend, but we definitely see ourselves as a next generation protein company.
Yeah.
For us, plant-based tech, traditional food development are really important to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I don't think one's more important than the other. I think they play equally important roles. Technology is really important in helping understand the research. How do you develop food? How do you get the health and taste benefits at the same time as understanding how to get the benefit for the environment? And also, when you look at the wide variety of plant proteins that are available, technology is a really important part in understanding how each protein provides a different sensory experience. And that's really one of the key drivers behind innovation. And we've been very fortunate in terms of a recent fundraise where we raised $31 million. And that's enabling us to invest more into the technology, understanding of plant-based protein research and development. But fundamentally, I think if you look at the global environment, I think the next new world economy is really going to be about engineering food systems built around plant-based food technology.
And I guess you touched on it there with, I guess, at a kind of a product level as well, that texture is so critically important within that equation as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the replication of what we call the next generation or the new generation of plant-based food companies is about getting to a much more of a meat-like taste, texture, and experience. I think if you look at yesterday's generation, there's some great products, but they didn't deliver against that consumer expectation.
Yeah. When it comes to the, again, sort of thinking about it from a kind of portfolio perspective, the impressive growth that you've seen so far has been built off a fairly core product range. How do you see that evolving into the future, particularly based off the point that you were just making around sort of meat-like and texture and so on? What comes beyond mince, burgers and sausage?
Yeah, so basically we see anything that is meat-based should really have a plant-based alternative, and there's no reason why not. We shouldn't be limiting it to a small number of consumer eating occasions. If anything, it should be against all eating occasions. So from our perspective, while our products, particularly our mince, is great in terms of making family favorites, we're innovating against white meat type products, but also convenient eating style products. So, food on the go, food that's easier to eat while you're out and about. And it's interesting when you look at some research that we've done, over a third of British consumers would prefer to have the option of, on a menu, a meat alternative rather than just being given a separate, veggie menu or the menu that comes out from under the table. So food service innovation is really important. So we're also looking at how we create quick, cost-effective solutions for operators.
And I guess that would include the popular QSR type formats and the favorites. I can see how we've absolutely got the in-home favorites, but then there's the equivalent in the out-of-home space as well, which it sounds like is very much on your agenda as well.
Yeah, it is, and I think the retail environment's moved quite quickly with the plant-based, and I think it's in the food service, the QSR, that's now playing a little bit of a catch-up, but that's moving very, very quickly. And I think the COVID situation that we've been through has actually allowed people to reset and rethink in terms of menus, some simplification, but also the change of expectation of consumers about what's plant-based on menus when they're eating out of home.
That's a great segue into my next question for you, actually, which is, how have you seen consumer attitudes change over the last few years in your experience with regard to plant-based? How has that world moved on? As an outside observer, it's moved very rapidly, but from a brand perspective, what's been your experience?
Yeah, they've moved and they've actually got stronger. So I think the underlying, they've always been there in terms of personal health, the environment, and animal welfare. They're the top three drivers of why consumers want to eat more plant-based. I just think they've become a lot more broadly accepted. There's a lot more awareness about it. But I also think there's still a growing need for brands and the category to educate not just consumers but wider stakeholders, including government, on the role that plant-based foods provide, and also playing a really important part in terms of changing negative food cultures and combating the climate emergency. I think there's a real expectation that platform is now elevated, and more education awareness is still required, even though it's become high on the agenda.
When you talk about those kind of three motivations, I would imagine over the last or the life so far of Meatless Farm, whether that be personal health or animal welfare or sustainability in the environment, that you've seen perhaps some fluctuation in which drivers are more prominent, either at a point in time or maybe even through a particular channel. I don't know if that's something that you've got any thoughts on.
Yeah, I think definitely from a younger generation perspective, there is an expectation where it's almost normal in terms of having plant-based food as an offer. So I think there's an expectation that it's readily available. It's the younger generation who generally tend to be driving the expectation and same product made available in everyday places. It's not a yesterday's approach where you had to ask, and then if you got the vegetarian food put in front of you, it wasn't enjoyable, or it may not have been replicating the same eating experience that your colleagues or your friends could have been eating. So very much more mainstream now.
We've certainly talked a lot about this. What's the kind of latest insight that you can share around the relevance of meatless foods in and around the COVID era? And when I talk about the COVID era, it's the broader era that we're in, as well as lockdown itself. Because I think we can all agree that despite vaccine on the horizon, this is going to be an influence in our world for some time to come.
Yeah, I think definitely it's had an impact on people's understanding of food, what they eat. The whole relevance of plant-based food, I think, accelerated through the whole COVID era. In the first lockdown, we saw demand. From our perspective, we were growing at 3 times the category rate, and the category was growing, like 50%. I think in part that was driven by increase of usage occasion, people's focus on health, being more aware of the environment, and making more time, I guess, in terms of experimenting with new recipes, trying new foods at home, and that resurgence of cooking food at home, taking time as a family, cooking together, and probably a lot of influence from younger members of the household. Pushing, saying, "Hey, let's try some vegetarian food or meat-free food, meat alternative food together." And since then, over a third of meat-eating British consumers are actually eating less plant-based food, and our research shows that a third of consumers dining out are looking for more plant-based food on menus, as they expect it to be there and I guess be mainstream.
Yeah. And I guess those the influencing generation, as you describe it, then there was a significant period of time this year where they were in the home with their extended family, parents, guardians, so were able to more positively influence what was being served up at home.
I guess so, and I guess it's almost like it's the modern day pest or power in terms of moving to plant-based.
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to sort of eating lifestyle, do you, as a brand, advocate? Is it meat reduction? Is it more vegetarian, vegan, flexitarianism? Where's your kind of positioning on that as a brand?
Yeah, really importantly, Meatless Farm is a brand that's viewed as inclusive, accessible to everyone. We don't believe that plant-based foods should be accessible to the few. So what we would then define our core audience as the flexitarians, so people who are aiming to, reduce their meat consumption, maybe swapping out 1 or 2 meals per week,
Yeah.
It's mediators making small changes that are going to have the greater impact and more realistic than, say, going for global veganism.
Yeah.
And last year we launched a Meatless Farm consumption target, which aimed to get households to swap one meal per week to plant-based. And
Hmm.
interestingly, as a result of doing so, we'd see an 8.4% reduction in greenhouse gas annually,
Uh-huh.
which is the equivalent to taking 16 million cars off the road.
Wow.
And then our campaign that we did earlier this year was about targeting those meat eaters,
Yeah.
and showing that plant-based food isn't about being boring or unexcited. We did it in a really interesting, attention-grabbing way that really engaged with that flexitarian consumer.
Yeah. Can you bring that to life to anybody that hasn't seen it?
Yeah, so we had the campaign that we had. We call it the MF campaign. So it was basically dot 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 f dot dot dot. So you can interpret into that what you like, but it was very much in a fun and cheek way about going meat free. It doesn't have to be with compromise. It can be done with a great tasting food, and I guess just making it relevant for consumers today, and not in a preachy way, because sometimes vegetarian food or veganism can come across as quite preachy, and that's not what we're about. We're about being inclusive for everybody.
And certainly that campaign is testimony to that, and that didn't come across as being preachy or virtuous in any way, actually. Yeah.
Good.
And there was certainly a lot of wry smiles around, certainly people that I know that came into contact with it. So yeah,
that's exactly what we wanted. Yeah. Good.
Can you tell us a bit more about the compositional makeup of the product in its basic form? And the reason for asking that is that we've certainly sensed a shift towards the need to clean up meatless foods, and this has happened in a fairly short space of time. With some of the first generations of some of the products that we saw on the market were not, they weren't necessarily labels that we could understand as the consuming public, and it felt like there was and still does feel like there's a shift towards cleaner or more understandable backs of packs when it comes to plant-based foods and meatless foods. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important. I think consumers' expectation of cleaner decks, less ingredients that they understand are really, really important. And from our perspective, we have nothing to hide, and we're very focused in terms of complete transparency. Our ingredient list is simple. Main ingredients: pea and rice protein. We blend with spices such as nutmeg and pepper, and vegetable extracts such as beetroot. We use only the highest quality plant-based ingredients, and where we do use soy, we only use non-GM soy.
Yeah.
And consumers are very aware of what's in their food, and you only need to look in the supermarkets and you see people, turning over labels and reading. And so it remains very high on our agenda, and we're proud to have one of the cleanest ingredient decks on the market. I think from an overall category perspective, there are products out there that, yes, do confuse consumers when they look at the ingredient deck, but I think this is the education and the shift that the whole category has to take in terms of continuing that drive to simplification and cleaner ingredient list.
Yeah, I mean, it would seem incongruous, really, for that not to happen. Really, I mean, we've been in the food industry for many years, and that's been a journey since certainly as far back as I can remember, anyway. So it feels like a natural catch up, really, and that's great to hear. Where does sustainability fit as part of your business purpose at a top line level, and then your kind of overall proposition? How does it influence what you do and how you do business?
Yeah, so it's clearly at the heart of our mission to reduce global meat consumption, and that hasn't changed since the conception of the company. It's core of what we do today.
Yeah.
And we believe there's a need to change the food system and the way we eat, and the Meatless Farm has a key role to play in that. And to help drive that change, we've just launched our Future Food campaign, where we did some research with UK families and identified there's some major issues that need to be tackled. British consumers want to live in a more sustainable way, but many feel that it's unrealistic and out of reach, and that's what we're calling the sustainability gap. And there's some major barriers that we identified, including transparency, cost, lack of knowledge, and the burden of pressures of life and shopping. So, for example, 2/3 of British families believe that eating sustainably is actually expensive.
Yeah.
Over half think that there's too much or too many conflicting sources of information and about how you actually live sustainably. Sustainably is actually quite conflicting. Yeah. And 70% want to see clearer labeled products and understand the products that they're buying, what is the impact on the environment. And I know I talked earlier about children and younger generations part of the movement. They're actually holding the key to driving sustainable living choices. With over half of British children worried about the future of the environment, and 85% of them wanting the families to do more to look after the planet. Yeah. So you can see that there's a real, urgency from a younger generation in terms of something being done. But the challenge that they've got is 2/3 of them aren't getting the information about sustainability from the parents, and less than half of them have been taught at school. Instead, they depend on TV, social media, YouTube. So we believe that the gap can only be closed through greater education, accessibility, transparency. And as a result, we're making several key commitments to address this. So we've committed to educating 5 million children globally between the age of 4 and 16 about sustainable eating. We'll do that by 2023, and we'll make resources available and activate through educational sessions in schools across key markets. Yeah. But also, all of our products will be labelled with environmental impact, and we'd be prepared to pay for a food industry levy to have that as a standard across the industry. And we'll also have a clear strategy in place on how to change our packaging from not only being recyclable, but to also being compostable. And we know that, this is an industry-wide challenge. The whole packaging issue needs to be addressed, and there needs to be significant investment from businesses who can afford to do so. So, if anything, the sustainability agenda is only strengthening within the Meatless Farm, and more commitment in terms of activating change to protect the environment.
And I don't know if you're able to say, but how do you plan to bring to life environmental impact on back of pack, or indeed front of pack? I remember Wayne and I had a conversation, and we walked out of a retailer. I bet it was 15, 18 years ago, and we both said to each other, it was then when all the health wheels and the traffic light system was into play, saying what we really need is an environmental impact wheel, we called it at the time. But it's quite hard to do, and to kind of bring that to life. So what are your thoughts on how you'll do that?
It is, and obviously, like when the traffic light system evolved, there were many different opinions and directions that it could have gone. I think you're absolutely right, though, in terms of on the front of pack, we should have something like the traffic light labeling. So whether that's the new CO2 footprint, ability for being recycled, and just generally in terms of, does this product help deliver a negative CO2 impact? And I think, we've got to start somewhere, and that's probably the first place to start, where consumers are actually quite tuned in, but they just need some more education on it. And I think there's other things that could be done, on pack or back of pack, inside of pack, doing educational aspects. So whether that's printed information, or whether it's QR codes where people can understand, okay, the product that I'm buying, what's the environmental impact from it?
Yeah. And I guess bringing that into sharp focus makes you look as a business at all of the different parts of the supply chain, right clearly through from raw material sourcing, but how you're getting it into RDC and all of those types of things as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you think of the meat-free category, we often use the evolution of innovation curve, and this is clearly an area that is gaining significant momentum. Where do you see it in its, I suppose, its life cycle towards total ubiquity? Where is it in your eyes?
So we're at the beginning of the journey. I think when you look at the amount of meat that is eaten globally versus the amount of plant-based food that is eaten, it's in its infancy. I think the category is young. I think next generation brands are still building out supply chains that the meat industry has had decades to optimize. I think you continue to see progress and efficiency of sourcing of ingredients and raw materials, and in particular for us, how we work with farmers from seed to shelf, which again is really important in terms of driving transparency to drive adoption. So I think you'll start to see, broader consumer repertoire. I think we'll see increase in consumer occasions, but importantly, products being affordable and accessible to everyone and everywhere. And innovation, again, is going to be at the heart of driving that in terms of making sure that there's the right food formats in products where you would normally find meat, in terms of now being a complementary meat-free product.
Thinking back to just over the recent past, and we touched on a few moments ago how it feels very plant-based eating, meatless eating feels very relevant within the COVID era. You obviously turned on very quickly Meatless Farm direct to door. Was that already in the pipe, or was that a response to COVID? And I suppose, is it a credible future route to market for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we'd always planned to do something, and we'd always been talking in the background about how do we make it our product accessible to consumers. So we'd planned to do something. It makes an easy switch for people, but we expedited it in March due to the lockdown.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic way for consumers to access our products who may be living in remote locations. We get emails from people in the Scottish Highlands, telling us it's fantastic, because they don't have a large supermarket near them. So it's worked really, really well. We're still seeing demand increase. We've got a very loyal base. And given that online shopping is one of the biggest consumer trends to emerge out of the pandemic, with 65% of shoppers buying more purchase online, we think it's only going to continue to grow further.
And I don't know if I can ask this, but one of our other speakers today is talking about on demand and direct to delivery. How do you service that? Is that through a dark kitchen model, or just the regular distribution infrastructure?
Yeah, so I guess the difference between dark kitchen and what we're doing. So the model that we have is we use a third party who delivers our retail product packaged up and bundled up. I think the dark kitchen aspect, in terms of having delivered food cooked, prepared, ready to eat through a delivery or an Uber Eats or whoever it may be, is absolutely an interesting area. And I think it's a topic that we're exploring for sure. Yeah. How do you do that, and the right partners to do it?
Yeah, definitely. Looking to the future, what's your hope for the future regarding how consumers, and I suppose the wider food industry really, will adopt a shift towards a plant bias? And I suppose, what part do you hope to play in that?
Yeah, simply, we hope consumers continue to recognize the benefits and the virtues of plant-based food as they look to, one, eat more healthily, but also drive sustainability. And, when we get to hopefully a post-COVID era, I think really, really important that shift that consumers have made is here to stay,
Yeah.
and I truly believe that it is. And I think the role that we have to play is about the education of plant-based foods, living in a more sustainable way, and doing that, not just across the food industry, but with government and key stakeholders, so that sustainability remains key on the agenda.
I guess some of the things we've talked about today are potential barriers around plant-based. So what do you see as, what are they in simple terms? Do you see those barriers towards plant-based food that I'm sure you're doing your best to overcome, but how do you characterize them?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge is the perception that a plant-based diet or plant-based alternatives are not tasty and they're not exciting for meat eaters.
Yeah.
And, in reality, that could be from a previous eating experience,
Cool.
not having enjoyed the previous generation of foods. Now that we're into this next generation of plant-based foods, we're battling against the perceptions built by some of those legacy brands, but we're driving trial, relevancy with consumers, keep innovating in terms of exciting products that are relevant for consumers, that whole brand piece that we're building in terms of not preachy but relevant and a fun tone of voice with the brand. Another barrier is actually where to locate in store.
Yeah, of
I
course.
think over the last couple of years, I think consumers have been, interested in coming into the category. They come into store, and it's like, okay, well, where do I find it? So having it readily available to find in store with signposting, I think, is key for the category. And I think there's a rapid movement across the retail industry in terms of actually doing that, because they see the consumer appetite to find the product, and they want to make sure that they're winning with the meat alternative shoppers.
And in your experience, is that providing a home for plant-based and meatless foods within the retail environment, or actually is it about locating it with its, let's call it its meat counterpart?
I think that's a great question. I think there's camps that talk about both being the right place. I think it's a little bit like the evolution of gluten-free. It's a little bit like the evolution of organic. It started in a category standalone on its own, and then over time it migrated into the category as part of a mainstream. I think we'll get there in the end, but I think for today it's about it's got its home. But as the category grows, I think it's only natural that it'll fall into the mainstream parent categories.
Yeah, so you see it as more of a journey as opposed to it's not one or the other. It's perhaps it's an evolutionary journey.
Yeah, definitely.
And to wrap up, I suppose, what would your advice be for a consumer considering the adoption of a greater proportion of what they eat being coming from and being rooted in plant-based foods?
Yeah, I think it's all about balance and small steps. It's it's about switching out 1 or 2 meals a week. You're not having to make a big plunge. It's easy. You don't need to reinvent what you're cooking either. So you keep it simple. You make your favorite dishes, but you just swap in a plant-based product. And most importantly, we're all about making it accessible and ultimately easy for the whole family to enjoy, as opposed to one person in the household having to make a meal that's different for them versus everyone else. It becomes very easy for the whole family to enjoy.
Well, easy and simple to adopt when it comes to catering and providing for a family. I'm sure everybody watching today can have some level of empathy with that. So, Michael, it's been a huge pleasure to welcome you as a speaker to our 2020 online Trend Summit, and for sharing the learnings and for being so open with the learnings and insights that you've of the last few years, and some glimpses into the future of plant-based and meatless food. So, Michael, thanks very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, Charles. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks again.